Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Runners Roundtable. We're in season 4. I am talking to inspiring female runners who are showing up and running in their own unique way and changing the landscape of running so that more women, more people in general, feel comfortable coming into the running space. And today I am speaking with Kelly Vigil. I hope I said that right. And I'm very excited to speak to you because I actually know you from your newsletters. And I don't even know how I got on the newsletter. No clue, like where. I'm just like, you pop up in my inbox. And I love reading your newsletter because I feel like the past time for you has definitely been full of heartbreak when it comes to running. And I am always so amazed at how people can share their heartbreak with running without making excuses for it. And I think that's why I like reading your newsletters, because you're like, yeah, this is it. And I'm like, it sucks. So I'm not going to say, oh, if this or that. You're going to say, this sucks. And then this is what I'm doing to get better for next time. So I feel like you don't hide from the running challenges you've faced. Instead, you're through your words teaching us all or showing us all, how do we make peace with running not being maybe how we envisioned it for ourselves. So I want to say thank you for that. And that's why I was like, let me reach out to her and see if she'd be open to talking to me about that, about how we continue to show up as runners when maybe running isn't what we've worked for, what we think we deserve or earned, or any of that, right? So
Yeah,
before we kind of get into the why or the how behind what I just shared about you, can you start us off by telling us who you are, what you do, and your running story?
sure. Thank you so much for having me. This is so much fun to have these conversations with you. Um, I am Kelly. I am a mom to 3 young kids. I have a 6-year-old, 5-year-old, and 2.5-year-old, so all very young. I'm in the weeds. And I am a runner. I've ran 7 marathons, 350Ks. I think I'm at almost 30 half marathons. I started running in 2011, so that's, a long time of just running races. And I'm also a run coach, where I do one-on-one coaching for runners and am certified in the run coaching, but also the health mindset side of
Mm.
things as well. So that's a huge focal point for me, is just making running work with your life, having your mindset where you're not getting burnt out. You're not just, like pushing yourself into the ground over and over again. So that's a little bit about me, but yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you for sharing all that, because it's always interesting how there's so many runners, right? There's a lot of people who run, but not everyone decides to go become a coach. So, at what point did you say, this is something I think I want to pursue?
Yeah, I started running in college, and I was a Girls on the Run coach back then. So you're not a certified run coach, but you're part of that nonprofit club. I absolutely loved it. And then right out of college, I did some youth running programs. I coached a cross country program, and then I created a running program for foster care children in that local area as well, which was awesome. So a lot of my coaching background was just for fun, just getting involved with clubs and, just youth wanting them to know moving your body is fun and everything like that. And it wasn't until, I don't know, maybe about 5 years later that I was like, I think I can do this one on one and help other moms and women and men too. I have a couple of men in my coaching roster as well. But I think in the running world on social media specifically, I feel like everyone, maybe not meaning to, but they tend to overcomplicate things, thinking that they need to do all these confusing long workouts to get the PR that they want, or they need to run 6 out of 7 days of the week, and they need to do run streaks, and they have to run 60 plus miles a week. I feel like a lot of that information is a little bit outdated, and I feel like a lot of that information is a barrier for people if they want to run, let's say, their first marathon or PR a half marathon, and they're looking at these people that are doing something that they can't do because they're a mom, they work, they have other responsibilities. I feel like that's just my main goal as a coach, and even just on social media, is to know that you don't have to do that and you can still reach those goals of yours.
Yeah, it's so interesting because I feel like social media is one of those things where I'm so grateful we have it. And then there's moments where I'm like, oh, social media, there's too much information out there. So there's definitely this dance between enough information, too much information. But I remember when I started running, I thought you had to do high mileage. I mean, I can recall one particular training cycle where I believe I peaked at maybe somewhere between 55 and 60 miles. And I was a mom of young kids. I wasn't enjoying running at that time because I felt like all my free time was spent running.
Mhm.
And this was a time where I was coaching myself. I was following whatever plan I found online and trying to bring things together that kind of made sense. That running 6 days a week and so intense, so intense. And thankfully for me, I did reach a breaking point, and I hired a coach,
Yes.
and I realized, oh, I can be good with. For me now, the sweet spot. If I'm in marathon training, I peak at 45 miles. I'm pretty good. Anywhere between
Yeah.
40 and 45. That really works for me, my body, my life, like what I can do. But I find that social media can be a gift in that. And it can also be a detriment with thinking that we have to do exactly as other people do in order to have the same results when it's not like that. No one is a carbon copy of you in your life. Like that's just not how it
Yes.
works. So when people come to you about coaching, how do you have that conversation with them of getting them to understand that, hey, this coaching is personalized to you? Because I feel like sometimes that gets lost in the messaging that when you work with a run coach one on one, it is one on one.
Yes. Yes, I love that you brought up the fact that your sweet spot, like what works for you, because just to answer your question, going right into it, I feel like I used Hal Higdon free trading plans for years. I absolutely love them. But when I became a mom, it was hard for me to understand how to switch things, how to make the, actual runs and workouts work with my schedule and my routine and what my body was capable of doing. And I feel like again, that's just a huge barrier is people find these training plans and they're like, "Oh, I have these friends that have used Hal Higdon. They all have PR'd their marathon. I'm gonna use that same training plan and see what happens." And then they end up either burnt out, injured, or you just not getting the PR. And I feel like running is so personal. I feel like people forget that because, yeah, we're all runners, we're all doing essentially the same motion of putting one step in front of the other, but all of our bodies are completely different and unique. All of our past experiences, injuries, flare-ups, everything, our health is different, our neighborhoods are different, like where we run, our environments, like there's so much that actually goes into the actual running portion of your life. And I always bring that up with my runners because it's one-on-one and personalized. And they're like, I just never thought of it as like a wholesome, like, my life is different than someone else's. I'm like, well, yeah, like you're going through different stress. That's been another big conversation with my runners is a lot of them have been stressed at work or stressed with motherhood and everything that comes in with the world as well. And I'm like, well, stress is stress. It doesn't
Hmm.
matter whether it's from marathon training or not. Your body is just like, whoop, we're stressed. So how do you deal with that on a personal basis?
Yeah, that is something that I feel like a broken record when I'm like, stress is stress is stress is stress. Doesn't matter if you're physically doing something or if you're like emotionally, it's stress. You can sit. I even tried to explain this to my youngest daughter because she's like, she always says she's tired. And I'm like, can we come up with a different word to describe how you're feeling? And but she was like, I just don't understand. Like, all I do is go to school and play volleyball. And I'm like, yeah, well, your brain is working while you're at school and you're sitting while someone is talking to you while you're at school. Your brain is
Right,
working. Physically, you may not be moving, but your brain is working. So, of course, you're tired. And that's
right.
something that I find if kids don't get it, right? I can excuse my child for not knowing it, but it's always so interesting how I feel resistant adults are to acknowledging, oh, wait, I have life stress. And because I have life stress at work or at home, or because,
Right.
this happened to me. Oh, no wonder I'm not feeling great on my runs. No wonder
Right.
things are feeling a little bit tougher. But I think that also goes into the mindset. So how did you come to that health mindset, and how do you incorporate it, or how do you talk about it and share about it so that people can start to expand their understanding of running being more than just running?
Yeah. So I studied psychology in school, sociology and psychology, but I've always had just an interest in knowing what our mind and brains are doing in athletic endeavors. So whether it was running or something else. But when I follow Casey Joe on Instagram. I don't know if you follow her, highly recommend. She got her PhD in basically like behavioral mindset for athletes. So like weightlifting, runners, everything, and she came up with the health mindset certification that I took. And it really just nails down into like how our brains work while we're on the run, literally and figuratively, and how do we work through it. And I think it's just so fascinating because, one, again, going back to everyone's mind is different.
Mhm.
And how we perceive things is completely different. And how, when you think about race day, how you visualize it is different. And it's a lot of it, without sounding woo woo, is very like conversational, like just asking a lot of questions, just figuring out what are the like automatic thoughts that come into your brain when you think about going for a long run, or when you think about doing a hill repeat workout or something like that. Like, what are the barriers in your mind, not necessarily your body, but a lot of people, again, don't understand that your mind and body are connected to the point where, if you're feeling burnt out on a run, maybe it's not necessarily the running, but it's also just like your environment and how stressed you feel just trying to get out the door, and a lot of people, it's hard to put two and two together without having like a bystander, like a coach or a running friend or something like that to really nail it down. So a lot of conversations happen around mindset, and it's just so fascinating to me. I think it's helpful for my runners too to just talk through things, and then they kind of start to put two and two together and they're like, "Oh, wow, like I never thought of these things that way."
Yeah, it really is. I find that for myself, it's taken, I guess, experience with running. Like the longer I run, the more I realize, oh, okay, it's my mind. My mind is going to be that thing that's going to, you know, pun intended here, but like that's what's going to run circles around me. It's not so much the physical act of running, it's what's the story that I'm telling myself before I start running, what's the story that I'm telling myself while I'm running, what's the story that I'm telling myself after I'm running. I mean, this morning was a
Yeah.
great example where I woke up and I kept saying, I'm just tired, I'm tired, I'm tired. So then I go into my run with this story of I'm tired. And guess what? I dragged my feet on
Yeah.
that run. And it was such a, when I finished, the story became, what an awful run, because I was so tired. And now it's like, it is what it is. Like that's what I had today, and that's totally fine. I don't need to label it as good or bad or any of that. It is what it is, because again, that story, my mindset going into that was, I'm tired. I don't want to do this, but I know I should do it. Like all that stuff. Um,
Mhm.
but it was fine. I mean, it ended up like I finished and I was like, cool, at least I didn't overexert myself and then like
Yeah.
really feel tired after it. I finished it and I was like, okay, I did it. Like we're good. Okay. So kind of to go back to what I said about you in my introduction on you, how has this mindset, this health mindset applied to you personally?
Oh man, I have so many examples of this, but I think just overall, when I started running in college, I had like all the free time in the world, right? Like all you have to do is just go to school, hang out with friends, and not many other responsibilities. So I was running all the time, running long runs just for the heck of it, doing race after race after race. There was a year I think I did like 3 or 4 marathons and like half marathons in between there, and I was trying to PR every single one because why not? And then when I was running all my long runs really, really hard, and I, was trying to just keep pushing myself, I found myself injured and burnt out really bad and not PRing. And here I am at 20 years old being like, why am I not PRing all these races? Like, look how fast I'm running on my training runs. Look how, how much I'm running here and there. And I think the mindset just around it is like, I feel like easy runs is a huge barrier. It was to me a long time ago. And I feel like there's no stopping of in terms of like, if I want to PR, I'm just going to push, 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 push. And that doesn't lead to good news all the time. Almost never. So I had a huge burnout there, and it wasn't until I started having kids that I was like, okay, something needs to change. Like I can't keep running myself into the ground because if I'm waking up at 5 a.m. for a long run, but then have to, tend to my kids, work throughout the day, I'm going to be, just not feeling well at all. So something had to change. That was kind of like my turning point on trying to figure out like what my mindset barriers were and what I needed to do to kind of get them. I also had huge race anxiety on race mornings and even the night before. I would like my stomach would be turning. I'd be so sick. And I'm like, why am I having all this anxiety from like one start line and one finish line when I know that I can complete the distance? And a lot of it was mindset. I was just putting so much pressure on that one day, one morning. So a lot of mindset work had to go around that. And it wasn't until I ran my first 50K. I had my two kids then, not my third yet, but that was like a huge turning point where I was like, I'm training for fun. Like, this is my alone time. This is my fresh air workout time. It's no longer a time that I'm going to punish my body for not performing well. And I mean, that whole training period, I look back and I'm like, that was probably one of the best times of my life because I was just so, I don't want to say carefree, because of course you care about your runs and you care about that finish line, but it just felt so much lighter and just easier to fit in because a lot of my runs were split up. If I had a 20-mile run and I couldn't do it all in the morning because my husband had work and I had to watch the kids, I would just do it in increments throughout the day. And I'm like, how cool is that? Like, it doesn't have to have so much pressure around it. So that's kind of the start of where I was going with my mindset. And I'm like, I am not alone in this. I know so many runners, even out of my running friends that I was running with. I'm like, we're all feeling the same way. Something has to change. So that was kind of the start of me figuring out like, okay, what needs to change and how do we do it? And a lot of it revolves around mindset. A lot of it is not physical capabilities. A lot of it is your mind.
I'm curious if that 50K, was it a road 50K or a trail 50K?
Trail.
Okay. So the reason I asked that is because from the discussions I've had with runners, various runners on the podcast, there's also a different mindset when it
Yes.
comes to trail running versus road running.
Yes.
So I'm wondering if that's something too that impacted you during that time of um the from my understanding, and I've only done, like one trail half marathon. And even then, in Miami, there's not a big trail running community that I know of. That I know of. Maybe it's changed, but that I know of, there's not. But when I speak to trail runners from other parts of the country, they're like, it's awesome. We don't care about time. And not to say that time isn't important, but they're like, yeah, when you're climbing up a mountain, time doesn't matter. When there's a big tree trunk in front of you, like it's not about that. Like for them, it's very much about the experience of like being out in nature and in the trails for just extended periods of time. So again, that
Yeah.
the question and the reason I asked that is just out of curiosity, if that's something that you feel like impacted you profoundly during that time.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely trail marathons, not even ultra marathons, but any race on a trail is normally just way more casual. I feel like it has so much, maybe it's just because it's a smaller community most of the time with those races, but I do feel like just changing my environment into that helped too. A lot of the time when I push my runners outside their comfort zone, it's not necessarily for like the physical endurance benefits. It's more so because before that 50K, I was only doing half marathons and marathons over and over and over again, which I absolutely love. They were all road, but my training looked very similar. I wasn't going on trails, I wasn't hiking, I wasn't, doing things that I did during that training plan. I think one, just changing it up is so beneficial. Even if you're not running a trail run, highly recommend just going out one day and hike, like run, walk a trail and just see how you feel after that. Because I feel like the changing of environment and just like, just trying something new. And I still feel that way. 2 out of 3 of my 50Ks that I've ran were on trail, and my 3rd one was the Marine Corps Marathon 50K, so that was all on road. But I do feel like the actual distance just has more of, like, a laid back community around it.
Yeah, I mean, you're echoing a lot of the sentiments I've heard from people who run the trails about uh, a different relationship to time, I guess is the best way to put it.
Yes.
There's just a different relationship to time. So you've done 50Ks, you've done marathons, you've done half marathons, you've done a lot of running since 2011. What would you say has changed the most for you in that time?
Oh, man. I feel like, well, I've always loved running, so that's always been my why behind it, but I feel like it changes with the season of life that I'm in, which is really helpful. It's never stagnant. So, like, in college, I started because, I was really stressed out and just kinda needed a release from, stress relief from that. And then it was more of like a social thing. I joined running groups and was meeting mom friends and things like that. And then it was, my alone time. Like, what can I do to get out the door for 30 minutes by myself, And then some days it's family time. Most of the time, I have my dog and all 3 kids with me, and it's all of us to just get out the door. So I think my why is the same, just the underlying love for it, but I feel like even day to day, it changes on, like, why I'm running that day. So I think that's really cool, though, to just kinda have it be with the flow of life.
Which is really hard to do,
Yes.
right? Like and again, for me, a lot of that comes from at this point experience. And when I say experience, I'm talking about just longevity, like the time that I have spent running, where
Yeah.
it's enough time has passed where I'm able to zoom out and see those peaks and valleys. Whereas when I'm living it, I'm just like, what's going on? Why am I not quote unquote progressing? And it's like, oh, because this is all part of a greater story. And even now, my focus with running is very much so running in a way that's going to keep me injury free for as long as possible. Like my goal is true longevity. Can I make it until
Yes.
I live to be 80 and 90 years old? Can I still line up for that 100-meter dash? Like that's my goal right now. So there's a different relationship too with running of I want to find enjoyment in the process of it and empowerment in myself of here I am doing this hard thing and I'm choosing every day to do this hard thing or I'm choosing to do those things that are going to help me do the hard thing even if I'm not a big fan of doing those hard things.
Yeah.
So it is one of those things that the longer I'm a runner, the more I'm able to allow myself to be in the different seasons of running. When people come to you and they're telling you, this is where I'm at, this is my experience, this is my goal, how do you help them see the seasonality of their life in the moment?
Yeah, I feel like it's not all at once. So I'm gonna preface this. It's not like I'm on my initial, onboarding phone call with my runners and we're just talking through and then it's like a light bulb goes on. I feel like it definitely happens over time and with working together because a lot of it has to do with their routine, number one, but also what their body is capable of. You have these huge goals, which like shoot for the moon, like the stars, everything. Um, but sometimes in that life, it doesn't always happen right then because maybe it's just not the right time, or maybe your body's just not physically ready for it. So I feel like it definitely happens through time where, they start to just kind of piece things together, but then also having those conversations with them on like what would be ideal and what we can inch towards. It doesn't happen like the first week we work together. If I'm your coach, it happens over time, and we're going to see how close we can get to that ideal week. Which, disclaimer, is never 100% ideal. I'm sure, yeah. I don't know of anyone that's like nailing all their ideal weeks for training. Um, so yeah, I feel like it's just over time. And then personally, I wanted to go back to what you said about running for longevity of it, because 2 years ago, I've had the goal of running my first 50 miler for years and years before kids, and then it's just kept getting delayed and delayed. But we had just moved to a different state, 7 hours away from all of our support system. And I'm like, I'm going to train for my first 50 miler, because I was, out of that, 1 year postpartum period. I was feeling a little bit better about my, just endurance overall. And I decided to call it quits on like week 10 of training, because I was so stressed out, not necessarily always from the training itself, but like we talked about with the move, with work, with kids, like setting everything up in our new life. And it just wasn't fun anymore. And in my post, when I was sharing this, I distinctly remember saying, I'm not running for one finish line. I'm running for
Mm.
all of my days ahead, all of my years ahead. And that was the reason why I decided to quit. And of course, you kind of have that like, guilt feeling of, I can't believe I'm like training for this and I just decided to quit and not even start. But I feel like that's just an important note to put out there on this podcast today, because I feel like how I am also in life, where I'm trying to run for until I'm 80. I'm trying to run for a long time, and I don't want one race to jeopardize that. What about if that one race made me not love running anymore? What about if it made me severely injured, or maybe it, just tore me up to the point where I didn't want to run for a really long period of time? I just didn't want to, go through that. I just want to keep doing what I love. So I just wanted to put that out there in regards to what you said.
Yeah, that's definitely a question I ask myself frequently of, is this the thing that's going to make me not want to run again? Like that's even when I have a bad race experience, that before I start to wallow too deeply in my disappointment, despair, sadness, whatever it is, because the emotions post race are always so heightened.
Yes.
Whether you're heightened in joy or you're heightened in disappointment, the emotions are big after a race. And the longer the distance, the bigger the emotions I feel. But I
Yes.
have to, yeah, I have to remind myself that, like, okay, this may not have been the experience I wanted, but is this going to be the thing that stops me from running? No. So let me kind of, let me have my
Right.
pity party. 'Cause I need to have my pity party, but let me also not stay here longer than I need to. And I think that's
Right.
also something that it is hard, because you've got big emotions in the moment, but then what we're talking about is the ability to zoom out to see that there is a
Yeah.
greater picture, which is, again, hard to do when you're flooded by really big emotions in the present moment. Where are you now with the 50 miler?
Oh man. So I tried again this last year. The JFK 50 milers in November, and I missed the time cutoff at mile 27 for that race. Huge heartbreak. I had spent like it was about 6 months of training for that race, put in the work. I felt like I could do it. It's not like I towed the line being like, I don't know. And I just was too slow after the trail portion. I don't know if you're familiar with the race, but I live in Charleston, South Carolina, where we have no hills. We have bridges, not hills. And that JFK 50 miler starts, the first 50 miles are on the Appalachian Trail, where you're getting close to 3,000 feet of gain. Lots of like technical trail running, which I am not used to down here in South Carolina. And that was the part I was nervous about. I'm like, okay, if I can make it through the first 15 miles, I'm golden. Like I can just cruise the rest of the way, because the rest of it is on road and a C&O canal path that's, gravel. And I made the time cutoff for the first 15 miles through that trail. I did it. I was so happy, but then my legs were just wiped from that trail portion, that I couldn't speed them up enough to make it to that 27 time cutoff. Um, And it's really hard. I mean, that happened in November, and I'm still feeling a little bit of heartbreak from it, like you said in the beginning, because one, I knew I could run the distance. I think that's the most disappointing part is I knew that I could run the distance. Two, it's not like I was injured or it's not like I fell and, I'm like profusely bleeding. It wasn't like one specific incident that happened to make me not finish the race. And I feel like that's kind of the gray area where I'm having trouble wrapping my mind around. I feel like a lot of runners feel that way too. If you don't have like an injury or something physical, it's really hard to like accept the fact that you still didn't finish the race. So yeah, I'm still working through all of that that came with it.
Yeah, and it's not, that's the tough part about running and doing events, because
Yeah,
you are spending an extended amount of time very much so focused on one day. You had 6 months of training run all in service of this one race day,
yep,
right? And I think there is there is grief in that, and there is grief in trying to figure out what's that thing that I could have done better. And it's sometimes
right.
there's just not one thing. Like it's just not. I mean, I had, and if you've listened to the Marine Corps, I did the Marine Corps Marathon this past
Yep,
October. And that was a race that I went into it feeling really strong. And I didn't really, I had a kind of a time goal, but it's my comfortable but challenging pace
yeah,
where I'm like, I think I can do that. If everything, like if I'm feeling good, I think I can do that. It's not a PR, but it is a comfortable but challenging. And that
right.
day I was overwhelmed by grief over my dog dying and over us having moved so many times. And we moved back into our house the Tuesday before the marathon. Okay. Tuesday or Wednesday.
Oh
I forget
yeah,
what day it was. But like, so I went into that race thinking physically, yes, I'm good. I'm great. And then while I'm running, just all this, it just waves of grief. And I thought, oh, there was no way I could have prepared for this. Like, no way. I did not have a training run that said, Steph, think about your dead dog for 10 miles. Like, that's not what happened in my training. Right. Like, and those are those things that when I finished, I'm like, well, that was the experience. And sometimes it's that there is no way for us to prepare for what happens on
yeah,
race day, right? Like we can prepare our bodies to endure the mileage, but there's so much that goes into it that truly is, it's a mystery. I don't know. To me, it's a mystery. Like anytime
yes.
I'm like deep in my thoughts with running, I'm like, I can't believe I'm doing this. Like me, like I'm still doing it. It sucks. Like it's hard. Running can be really, really hard. And I'm still showing up and I'm still doing it. And it sounds like you're still showing up and you're still doing it. So what was that mental process for you after that 50 miler?
Yeah, very emotional, very emotional, as you can tell. It's hard because, like, as a coach, if I was my own coach, I would talk myself through it being like, that one day, like you said, you can't control everything. But I was able to stay consistent in my 6 months of training before that. My fueling was on point. I was so proud of myself for that because I worked really, really hard to make sure I'm fueling myself really well for those long miles. Um, and so, like, I'm like checking all these off. I think the biggest mindset thing is, like you said, sometimes you just don't know what happens. Like, of course, I can probably say that I needed more trail miles to get my legs ready for what they were going to endure. More strength. I feel like those are all things that I could be like, okay, I could have done that more, I could have done that more. But there was nothing in my training beforehand that would have told me that. I mean, knowing that it was on the trail, but I did what I could where I was. So,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? Like, I feel like there's a lot of overarching things looking back, but I'm like, when I was in my training plan, I was doing what I could do. I was doing the best that I could with what I had, and I felt like I was ready. So again, looking in hindsight, those are the two things that I would say, which I've already implemented the strength training portion. I'm like, I just got to join a gym. I joined a burn boot camp. I don't know if you're familiar, but they
Yeah.
basically just force you do all strength workouts. I'm like, I need that because of course I'm going to choose to run over strength. Um, so I'm like, okay, I already implemented that. And now I just have to figure out the trail portion. I feel like mindset wise, kind of talking myself through it over time has helped. But again, like I couldn't change race day. I couldn't change how my legs were feeling on that day. I couldn't change the course. I couldn't change where I lived. So a lot of it had to do with uncontrollables, which is the hardest part. And I feel like it has to be talked about. I've been very vocal about it on my Instagram because I was also very public about like I am training for my first 50-mile race. You know, people knew
Yeah.
that I was running that race on that day. Um, and so, yeah, it feels like a big letdown. I felt like I let a lot of people down with it just because I knew that people were cheering me on. I was getting messages throughout the day. But I also feel like it needs to be talked about. Sometimes it's just not your day, and sometimes that finish line doesn't happen. And that's not necessarily because you're a bad runner or you didn't train or anything. Sometimes things just don't line up. Um, and yeah, it's hard. Like it's not easy to deal with, but I feel like it definitely needs to be talked about more because I feel like a lot of runners on social media see the extreme of, I didn't finish that race because I broke my ankle or I was, throwing up and couldn't hold my food down. Like those are extremes on good reasons why you shouldn't finish a race. But there's also that gray area that happens to a lot of runners.
Yeah. There's those things are like, well, of course you couldn't control throwing up, right? Like that
Right.
excuse. And it's not, I don't mean to say like excuse, but that's something that more people will accept, right? Whereas if you say like, no, I just didn't, my brain wasn't in it, right? If you say my brain wasn't in it, then it's like, what? But it's not your, like, it's your body that has to move.
Right.
So I find that really interesting. And also listening to you speak. So I'm in Miami, Florida, and that's been one of those things people have suggested to me. They're like, oh, trail running, switch it up, trail running. And I'm like, that's cool if you have access to that. For me,
Yeah.
I don't have access to that. And again, if you're in Miami and you're listening to this and you know where the trails are, go ahead and hit me up, let me know. But I find that even for myself, when I'm thinking about races, there is an element of being tactical about the races that I choose because I want them
Yes.
to be races that, yes, they're going to challenge me, but also fit within what I'm able to train in. Right. So
Yes.
there are some incredible races that are beautiful races, but guess what? They're rolling hills from start to finish. I don't have
Yes.
rolling hills here. Like, I can go up and over a bridge back and forth, and that's great, but it's not the same as practicing on rolling hills. It's just not. And I know people may listen to this and be like, oh, but we do it all the time, and that's what works. And it's like,
Yeah.
cool, that's what works for you. But for me,
Yeah.
it doesn't, especially when I for me personally, part of what you're doing in training or my philosophy is you're building confidence in your ability to do it, right? Whatever it is that you're trying to do, you're building that confidence to do it. And living in sea level Miami doesn't always leave
Yeah.
me feeling confident to do something that's like rolling hills or to do something that would be a technical trail race because that's not what I'm exposed to. And even if I wanted to expose myself to that, I'm probably going to have to drive, 30 to 45 minutes away to do that. And I honestly, I'm a very lazy person. I either like to run in my neighborhood or like a 10-minute drive to run where all the runners run. So I think that's something
Yes.
also we don't I feel like we just see the glory of certain events or doing certain things and we don't necessarily think about, okay, but how would this work for me and
Yes.
my personal life? And I appreciate that those are the kind of the questions that you're talking about, but also that's what you're sharing of. This has been my experience and how I'm trying to move forward with it and learn from it. So, is that 50-mile goal still a goal for you?
Yeah. Well, big question, I guess, that's looming. It depends on the day. Most
Okay.
days I want to run that 50 miler. It's a goal, like I said, that I was signed up for my first 50 miler 7 years ago when I was pregnant with my first baby. I signed up and I think I was on like week 4 of training when I found out I was pregnant. And I run when I'm pregnant, but I was like, for my first 50 miler, I just do not want it to be when I'm going through my first pregnancy. I just didn't feel like that was the right choice. So I pushed it off to have another baby, pushed it off to have my third baby. So I'm like, okay, this is a dream I've had for 7 years consistently that I've been really trying to get my body ready for. And so, yes, I would love to do the JFK 50 miler in November. It's still like, I know the weekend that it's at. I'm kind of like seeing how I feel. I'm just trying not to make any rash decisions because, like you said, I am also notorious to be the coach with my runners that um, to say no to races. And I love racing, and I think it depends on your goal too. Like for my first 50 miler, that's a big goal. Like I'm going to need the logistics and everything like that to line up to be able to complete it. But if you're talking about doing, let's say like a 10K or a 10 miler when you're training for a marathon just for fun, then those are things like, okay, just don't make it a PR race. But there are times where you really do need to think about like, what can you do with your life right now, and I'm waiting to kind of feel it out to see how I feel in the spring because I don't want to get my mind set on it right now and then maybe something happen in our life in the spring and then it would be another letdown. So I guess I'm kind of trying to comfort myself in that way.
Listen, girl,
But
I was gonna say, we are drinking from the same water because
yeah.
that's kind of how I feel right now with trying to make any decisions. I mean, I am scheduled to run the Chicago Marathon this fall, but anything beyond that, I'm like, I feel like if I decide to do anything else, I feel like I'm making a rash decision. And
Yeah.
I don't even know, I can't even tell you what specifically is, I mean, I can tell you there's different factors that are contributing to that, but I've spent the past few weeks thinking I have commitment issues. I'm like, I think I have commitment issues to my goals because I don't know what I want to do. And it's like, it's not that, it's just that there's so many unknowable factors right now that committing to anything else doesn't feel right because I can't commit to it with the integrity that I like to commit to things.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. I think it's so hard to know that. I don't think you have commitment issues.
Okay.
But it's so hard to know that, and I feel very similar in terms of, like, if I were to say yes right now, I feel like I'd be putting the pressure on not only my running, but just my day-to-day routine, which I think is way too early for me to be doing that. So that's why I'm trying to hold myself off by going back and forth and really trying to think through like, is this a smart decision? Not only because it's my, big goal, but would next year be better instead of this year? Or I don't know. There's just, especially when you have kids, like we were talking about your daughter's volleyball schedule and everything like that. I just feel like you kind of have to play it out and see what's right for you during that season of life. And it doesn't always work out with your goals, which isn't a bad thing.
Yeah.
That's how life is.
Yeah. Listen, that's how life is when you share it with others, right? Like where there's
Yeah.
some seasons where I can be center stage, and then there's some seasons where I need to be in the audience and let someone else take center stage. And that I think is also really, really hard because we again with social media, we live in this space where it seems like everyone's racing, everyone's signing up, everyone's entering a lottery, everyone's doing it, and it's like, okay, but where are the people who are just running to run, right? Like where are y'all?
Right.
I want to see where you all are, because it does feel like and especially now, as we're going into spring, we're going to start coming up into some of the bigger races, whether it's your marathon majors or your cherry blossom 10 miler, right? Like we're going to start coming into the
Yeah.
season where there is a lot of racing, and it is hard not to, I guess, get swept up in, oh, everybody's racing, so I should be racing. Everyone has something on the calendar, so I should have something on the calendar. And it's,
Yes.
no, you don't. So, I mean, I know for myself, I keep telling myself, I'm like, I don't have to make any decisions right now. I don't have to make any decision today. And the fact that I don't have to make a decision is really nice because that means everything's a possibility for me at the moment.
Yes. Yeah, and just going back to that, everything's in the season. There are a handful of runners I've coached since I started coaching 3 years ago. So I've been through them with a lot of seasons. Two of them got pregnant. We went through pregnancy and postpartum together, and they did have a full year of just running for fun, but it was still having the goal of being consistent, maintaining their endurance. So I think not necessarily a bad thing to have quote unquote the off season. I feel like that's kind of like has a stigma around it now, but I feel like there are other goals besides world majors and PRs and BQing and run streaks. Like it's okay to take some time for yourself and to make the goal something a little bit more mild, like strength training an extra day a week or working on your running form. I mean, those are like huge things that could benefit you
Yep.
when you do have time to go after the world majors and BQing. So, yeah, I just wanted to put that out there because there are runners I've worked with for quite a while where we've been in the stage where they're going hard after all their goals because it fit with their life.
Yeah.
And then there were months up to a year of them not doing that, but we were still focusing on other things that would benefit them in the future. So, yeah, it's just all about all seasons of life. That's how running is.
Absolutely. How did you decide on one, your Instagram name, which can you share that with us? And then two, to start writing a newsletter?
Yeah, okay, I made my Instagram name in college, which is More Miles, More Fun. Come say hi. I used to have a blog in college about running, which was More Miles, More Fun. That was the name of my blog. And I kind of stopped with that after I started working full time and having kids. I no longer have that blog, but I started my newsletter because maybe this is how you got on my newsletter. I still do virtual races for charity sometimes. And so I have a lot of runners on my email list that found me through those virtual races where all the money goes to charity, whatever we're running for. But they wanted kind of more of like content, not only like personal content, which I do share in the newsletter, but also like what I'm reading about running or what I'm watching on the treadmill. Like, are there any cool shows or podcasts or YouTube videos that I'm listening to while I'm on the run and things like that? So it's been nice to do a monthly newsletter, and I'm actually hoping to do it more frequently now that I have a little bit more time. But yeah, I love it. And I get emails back from people on my newsletter, which is really, I feel like it's more of a personal way to connect outside of social media. I love social media so much, especially Instagram. And I love to get messages, but I feel like something about getting an email reply back is a little bit more personal and you can just kind of have more of a laid back conversation sometimes in that sense. So yeah, it's been really, really fun.
Yeah, that's what now that you say that, I'm like, it has to be then somewhere along the pandemic because that's when I was doing a
Yes.
lot of virtual races and whatnot, or just part of different virtual relays and whatnot. So now that you say that, I'm like, yeah, that's probably where it is. Okay. I have think two more questions for you. So you already told us where to find you, More Miles, More Fun on Instagram. And now the question is, what do you have coming up that we can celebrate you in?
Um, well, talked about strength training more. I feel like we can all celebrate ourselves. All the runners that are prioritizing strength training now, I am celebrating you all because I'm in that boat as well. Um, but I'm also just growing my coaching base as well, which I'm celebrating. I have a lot of runners starting to work with me, which is really exciting. And I just have a lot of fun stuff coming up in my coaching business where I do virtual challenges in my Facebook group, which are also free, just like month-long challenges. Yeah, and you can find all of that on my website or on my Instagram account. I have all of that there. And then just real quick for the virtual races, I don't know if you've ran this one, but Kristen from Melon K is her username on Instagram. We do a Every Mother Counts run on Mother's Day every year. Raise a lot of money for that nonprofit. All of the money goes there. And we do a Mother's Day 5K and 10K that's virtual. So we'd love for you all to join us. And yeah, raise money for Every Mother Counts on Mother's Day.
I love that. I love that. And now again, my brain is now going through the Rolodex of your emails. And I'm like, yes, there was a period of time where you were talking about where you did share a lot of different virtual races, how much was being fundraised, how much you fundraised. So
Yes.
now all of these pieces are starting to come into place, and I appreciate it. All right. The last question I have for you is we've talked about a lot, and there's so much for me that I'm going to take away from this conversation that I'm going to think about a little bit more, and I'll probably journal about later. But in everything that you've shared, and if there was one takeaway from this conversation, what would you hope we walk away from it with?
I think just the general knowledge that going through different seasons of life that are different than what you see on social media or your running friends or your running group is okay. And I would even say preferred. I feel like I'd be a little bit more concerned if we were all, training the exact same, going after the exact same goals. I feel like it wouldn't be as fun. And I just want runners to know, and just everyone in general, that even if you have your sights on big goals, if now is not the right time, it's okay because you're eventually going to get there and you can do little stepping stones now that will help you reach that big goal. So just go with the flow of the life seasons. And I feel like that's when you can really nail down your goals when your life and routine aligns with it. So, just work on what you can now and stay consistent.
I'm going to say anything else. I'm just going to moment of like silence so that you can hear me snapping because yes, yes to all of that. Kelly, thank you so much for joining me and for sharing so much of your wisdom and your experience with us. Everyone, we'll see you next time. Bye.
Thank you so much.